share some of the insights I've picked up along the way. Okay, there is a great little picture there. Once again, my name is Asha Hagood, and I've got the name tag to prove it. Just a little bit about my background. I've worked for about 9 years cumulatively at Atlanta Fulton Public Library. Probably the biggest volunteer acquisition I did while there years ago was for our staff development day, where I recruited our vendors and presenters and oversaw the logistics concerning them. So that was about 40 speakers, a little over a dozen vendors. In-kind speakers and such may not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of volunteers, but there's certainly some similarity in terms of how one will go about recruiting and handling those folks and applying them to your mission. But with Fulton County, I also recruited and trained volunteers to deliver the adult literacy program. I did a stint in AmeriCorps Vista as none other than a volunteer manager. I worked with a kids club and essentially helped build the organization's capacity through recruiting, training, and providing support for the volunteers. So those volunteers were applied to ongoing efforts like day-to-day activities within the organization, but also to projects and events. I worked as a media specialist in a K-12 environment where I had to tap into parents as a volunteer source, as well as do some outreach to other organizations like sororities to supplement and get the volunteers I needed for projects that required many hands on deck. So somehow became synonymous with volunteer wrangling and have been pressed into that service in my personal life as well. So I've recruited and managed the volunteer corps for a huge annual fashion show that my community does, as well as performing volunteer recruiting and managing for a running club called Muslimas Indoor. And in the running community, as far as volunteers go, you get as good as you give. So if you're providing volunteers from your club to an event like Hot Chocolate 5K, wonder if any of you guys have the pleasure of experiencing it this year, where it was like freezing cold rain, but my volunteers were stellar, and they really gave it all they had. But if you provide volunteers from your club to an event like that, they're more apt to work with you if your club does a race and needs volunteers. So fast forward to here and now. I do outreach for a wonderful service, which Dorcas mentioned, called GLASS. It is a mouthful spelled out, but our mission is to make libraries accessible to those who can't read traditional print material due to a visual impairment or can't hold a book due to a physical impairment. And I haven't done any volunteer wrangling since landing here last year, but I suspect that might change. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the ins and outs of recruiting volunteers, training them, and applying them to your tasks. I'll share some pointers and resources that have served me, and we'll do some Q&A. And this won't be comprehensive by any means. There is a vast world of volunteer management out there, volunteer concerns. There's even a certification program in the works, certification of volunteer engagement. I think the organization is called CVE. But I do hope to share some beneficial resources today and spark ideas that you can take back and use with your agencies. So before we jump all the way in, I'll share a few photos of my work with volunteers to get us kind of warmed up. And for that first picture, upper left-hand corner, I think all the librarians in the room know what's going on in that picture. It's a version of weeding, and I'm pretty sure I take this version of weeding any day of the week over the collection development version of weeding, but that's just my personal preference. This was a service project that I recruited volunteers for a few years back, and it was like a park beautification deal. And I included that picture just to illustrate a very important practice, and that's getting in the trenches with your volunteers. So yes, you do have to maintain an overarching view of all the coals in the fire, so to speak. So you can't immerse yourself to the extent that you're not paying attention to all of the moving parts. But getting in there and doing the work you're asking your volunteers to do shows solidarity with them, and it allows you to have a firsthand view of any processes that might not be working so well, so you can, kind of tweak them in real time. The second picture is one of the finished flower beds at the end of the day, because many hands make light work. Bottom left-hand corner, there's a picture of a volunteer artist preparing a wall for an art project and tasking some of the youth participants. And that last picture finally is the finished wall. And if you're ever in the East Atlanta area, you can go check it out in Brownwood Park. Did a really beautiful job. A couple more pictures. That top left hand is a photo of some of the service. Both of these are photos of some of the service groups I acquired. Top picture shows a group from a Christian leadership camp. They were excellent. They came out to provide camp counseling with our summer program. And the bottom is a large group of volunteers that we got from Kennesaw State University's athletic department. Another excellent group, indispensable. Before we take a deeper dive, if I had to give my absolute best practice with regards to volunteer management, and this is probably most pertinent to projects or events, it would be to always have a lieutenant, have a second in command that has the same knowledge base as you, so all the knowledge regarding the logistics doesn't only live in your head. And it's very important because things happen and there should be someone who can run point if need be. So let's talk a little bit about the lingo. And, a lot of the terminology that you'll encounter in volunteer-focused content or when communicating with other volunteer managers, there's not a ton of it that just isn't, common sense. But these are two distinctions, I think, that are important, and that's ongoing volunteer core versus service project or event volunteers. So one you intend to apply to your daily affairs, maybe administrative tasks. You might look for someone highly specialized in a certain area. They call those highly skilled volunteers who are, but they obviously want to donate their time. So maybe those are students who want practicum hours or an unpaid internship. And those ongoing core volunteers, they would require more of an investment in terms of the effort to recruit them, as well as the measures you're going to go to in order to vet them. You may need to do background checks, and sometimes those there's a fee associated with those, or they may need to do a mandated reporter training. In some settings, this may be more necessary than in others. For example, if you're an organization that works with children. But with project or event-based volunteers, you're looking to acquire volunteers, usually a great deal of them, anywhere from just 50 to hundreds. In my time as a volunteer manager, I think the greatest amount that I acquired was 200 volunteers. But 50 to hundreds, and you're looking to apply them to tasks in support of your event. Some may come into play earlier on, like in the planning stages, and some might not be activated until go live day. So we're just going to talk a little bit about getting them, recruiting them. And this is presupposing that you and your organization have done some pre-planning and developed a timeline that you and your volunteer recruiting and managing and all the communication that goes along with that fits into. And so here are some places you might look to in order to find those volunteers. Religious organizations are a great source. Maybe organizations that you already have relationships with, personal relationships with, or you may need to drum up relationships with some of the religious organizations in your community. Sororities have also been a great resource to tap into. They're always, in my experience, very willing. They seem to have like seasons where they, are kind of actively searching for service projects to apply themselves to. And I've had great experience with them. Also, civic affairs offices at your local university. And beyond just using them to get volunteers, you may take it a step further and, drum up a relationship where you get work study students. So, of course, that's moving kind of outside of the realm of volunteerism, but it's also, in support of your workflow. Work study students are an excellent resource. In my experience, there's a memo of understanding that has to be drafted, and there are some other kind of legal concerns that have to be hashed out. But, yeah, all that to say, civic affairs offices are a great place to tap into with the local universities. Big box companies, and when you can just browse their websites and look for terms like corporate citizenship or corporate giving. I've had great experiences with Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, IHG. So tap into those websites and look for that terminology and drum up a conversation with them. Also, affiliates of your organization. So places that you already have a partner, your organization already has a partnership. They may have access to the resource of people and can solicit volunteer services from them. The friends groups that are affiliated with your library, you can task them with finding volunteers for you. In my experience, they often have a great reach and they've got great connections and partnerships, even within their personal dealings. So they can be tapped into as well. Volunteer fairs obviously are a great way to recruit, and Hands-On Atlanta is a great touchstone for kind of tapping into where the whens and wheres of those fairs. Because if you're not immersed in the volunteer world, you might not even know that the volunteer world that volunteer fairs are a thing. But once you've kind of established a relationship with Hands-On Atlanta and gotten on their mailing list, then you'll hear about things like that. You can tap into those for your recruiting purposes. So here's a little handout, cute little handout that features the A to Z, the ABCs of volunteer recruitment. And some are not terribly inventive, but, some of them I did think were noteworthy. It displays that old, library standby. If you have a service project that you kind of want to apply volunteers to, a display might go a long way to kind of make it more visual and put it in front of your public's eye, an information table. Cues for questions or information session. So maybe you kind of set up and do a little information session about what it is that, you are seeking volunteers for. And that kind of drums up interest and increases the likelihood that folks will show up and apply themselves to your mission. Oh yeah, M is for mayor. Um, I thought that one was a great strategy. Trying to enlist the support of the mayor and council members um, definitely would add some greater visibility to whatever your project was, and in turn could help you to drum up volunteers. So there's a little list that you can refer back to and just pour through it and see if there are any other strategies that you could use as a jumping off point. And to round out the discussion on recruiting, let's take a look at considering online volunteers. Um, and we're also going to pretend that this image isn't creepy at all. It's just a little helping hand reaching through the screen. But yeah, I termed it e-volunteers, and it's rather than face-to-face, they're just assisting at a distance. And there's many reasons why organizations or initiatives would involve online volunteers. They're pretty much the same reasons organizations involve on-site volunteers. Uh, but here are a few of the more salient reasons for an organization to engage in virtual volunteering. One, I think the most obvious, that they extend your resources. And we haven't made much mention of that great determiner, the budget, but we know it's always lurking. Small budget or lack of budget may be the impetus for seeking volunteers in the first place. And volunteers can indeed be a great fix, but I caution they must be used responsibly. Legally, they can't start to bleed into employee status. They aren't covered insurance-wise like employees are. They can't be compensated. There are some confidentiality concerns that could come into play. So yeah, manage their expectations, be upfront with them, respect their time, but by all means, if they can in some way save you from making expenditures, then apply them liberally, but responsibly. Um, Online volunteers, just as those volunteers who work on site, extend the resources of an organization. The additional help augments core staff efforts and helps an organization to do even more. So they and other volunteers are not, however, replacements for employees. So it's very important to bear in mind. And I included a link, but these points were, I accessed these points from a document, or a book rather, an online book called Fully Integrating Online Service into Volunteer Involvement. And she has some great content there. Two, they expand your reach. So an organization that embraces virtual volunteering gives volunteers new ways of supporting causes they feel passionate about. This can lead both to expanding the involvement of on-site volunteers and to involving new volunteers altogether. Third, it allows for volunteering anytime, anywhere. Virtual volunteering can remove some time and physical barriers for both current and new volunteers. While the time required for volunteering online is real, not virtual, volunteers can provide a service, ask questions, or provide feedback at whatever time is convenient for them outside of a few required live meetings with staff or other volunteers. It allows for a reach to a younger generation. The internet often offers a proven tool for recruiting younger volunteers, which is a difficulty many organizations face. We've noted earlier that online volunteers may represent a variety of populations. While it's certainly true that people under the age of 30 are more prone to use online technologies than any other age group, even people in their 40s have used the web for most of their professional lives. 9, it helps you stay green. You save the environment. Online volunteers can be environmentally friendly. there's no car exhaust required, no parking spaces. Organization doesn't need to provide them with a desk and a chair. So you may want to encourage your online volunteers to dispose of any waste associated with any projects that you guys are undertaking in an ecologically friendly manner to be in keeping with that Save the Environment mission. Better record keeping, and I think this is perhaps the chief point among them. Managing volunteers virtually can create automatic, extensive records of both volunteer activities and interactions with volunteers. So you have records that can be used to generate statistics, provide quotes for an upcoming grant proposal, or evaluate the overall volunteering initiative. An organization that manages virtually gains an archive of emails, instant messages, chats, online forum messages, photos, audio and video recordings related to volunteer discussions and activities. So there's just this built-in paper trail that, is a great perk with the online volunteer piece. In recruiting, as well as throughout the process of managing volunteers, communication is key. So here are just, a few tips that I'd offer. Create some stock letters at the outset. And I would do one to solicit old volunteers and one to solicit new volunteers. And old volunteers are so key. They're familiar with, processes. They may have even been affiliated with the organization longer. In some instances, longer than you have as the volunteer manager or acting volunteer manager. So yeah, create. Be thoughtful about the communication that you draft to speak and solicit them. Consider using an email tool that will provide an automated response to anyone who follows up, and then follow up with a more personalized response after that. And that's because you don't want there to be a lot of dead air, so to speak. You have to walk a fine line between nagging them and just being a reminder. So volunteers, they sometimes flake, and you don't want the reason that they flake to be because you failed to provide timely updates. Be transparent about what the job entails. Sometimes we have dirty jobs that need doing, and someone might want that dirty job. One of the jobs that was kind of notorious as far as the grunge factor was that we had to recruit people to move great piles of wood chips from one end of the park to the other, and there's no telling what you might encounter in those piles. But yeah, that said, when you're transparent and upfront about what it is, and you can be thoughtful and funny in your language, however, in keeping whatever your corporate culture is. But there is a volunteer for every job. So we got folks that, were interested in kind of having a physical component to their volunteer task. And, they were multitasking, getting their workout on while they are volunteering. But be transparent about what the job entails. And regarding logistics, in your communications with the volunteers or potential volunteers, no amount of information, in my experience, is too much. You want to tell them everything, from parking details to landmarks, that let them know when they're close, who to check in with, if lunch will be provided. That last email that they get before reporting to work is usually a long one, but they can refer back to it for anything and everything. So everything that you can think of that could be pertinent to their volunteer experience, I like to go ahead and include that as concisely as I can, but to have it included in that communication. I also like to encourage and almost mandate volunteers to get on an app like WhatsApp so that we can have real-time communication, which is especially important on event days. And when you have events that might have, you and your volunteer corps spread out physically over the venue, it's important because we just touched a little bit on budget. Not every budget is going to allow for walkie-talkies, but most everyone does have a smartphone. And even if they choose to take it off their phone later, I do try to stress and plead for volunteers to use apps like WhatsApp so that we can maintain communication. We're going to talk a little bit about training them. And training is not a one-size-fits-all. So you're going to look at, your situation and determine the best way to proceed, virtual training or face-to-face training. I will note, for ongoing volunteers, you may go ahead and provide an orientation. And for one-time volunteers, you might just do an information session and kind of incentivize their attendance at that information session. So in my time at Atlanta Fulton Public Library, I worked closely with our in-house volunteer office. At the time, I believe it was headed by Marcy Myers. Yeah, I believe it was Marcy. And they provided a great orientation and screening process. In these face-to-face meetings, they do require some investment of time from the potential volunteer, but it really helps to get them connected to your mission and more apt to buy in. But by all means, we do want to recognize that, time is a precious commodity. You want to be respectful of their time. So fill your audience out. You may want to scrap face-to-face meetings if they're just, one-time volunteers. The first and last time you might see them might be on event day. So in the case of scrapping face-to-face, you can train them by simply sending instructions for what they'll be doing. And you do want to make sure that they are, comprehensive instructions. But sending instructions for what they'll be doing, maybe sending a job aid, those little instructional one-sheet kind of deals, or just by filling them in when they get there and when they arrive early on event day. And if I failed to mention it, always stress to them that they, to get there early, at least 30 minutes. So in the same vein of training, you may want to employ some assessment. You may want to get quizzy with it. I would suggest using some type of diagnostic tool that you develop, doing a pre and post quiz, and just using that opportunity to discuss, the expectations of the volunteer assignment. Conversely, you could create a virtual training that the volunteer applicant can do on his or her own time. And with the diagnostic, I didn't use it to weed anyone completely out, but just to give them an idea of what kind of aptitude it would be helpful for them to have. And then, of course, we could use that as a jumping off point for, more training, further training if necessary. And in the case of the virtual training, mine was often just a PowerPoint. But if you're, that you would just email to your potential volunteer. But if you're fortunate to have an LMS with modules and knowledge checks and all those different metrics and all, of course, that's excellent, and that would be, great for you to use that. And of course, that will be followed up with on-the-job training but the key is just to be very accessible and responsive to your volunteers if they have questions. So tasking them. You've recruited them, you've determined how you're going to apply them, either be it in an ongoing fashion, or if you are staffing a one-time event or project. But these points about tasking them apply in either case. You do want to stress flexibility to your volunteers. You may have discussed ahead of time the way that you want to use that volunteer and how you're going to apply them, and you may get thrown a curveball and that changes. You do want to be respectful of any preparations they may have made to to volunteer for you in the way that you guys previously discussed. But at the end of the day, it is about flexibility and their willingness to be applied in a different way if need be. So yeah, as much as possible, stick to the script. But of course, we've already stressed flexibility. Oh yeah, try to let friends work together is another great practice, because it often has a positive impact on work output. Now I say often. There are those cases where it has a terrible impact on work output, and the task isn't getting achieved, but the friends are catching up with each other. So it swoop in and reassign if necessary, and that just goes back to your purview, and you of course immersing yourself in the work as well, but also kind of maintaining a overarching view of all of the moving parts. So we're going to take a couple minutes and look at a video that kind of shows some effective volunteer management and some great volunteer morale. And here's a volunteer management that has managed to get his volunteers to feel the feeling, and that's really important, to get them to have buy into your mission and be connected with your mission, because of course that's going to positively impact their performance. So here goes technology. It's okay. Okay. I love that. Community opportunity. And yeah, he mentioned the importance of kind of embedding some folks into uh, the project there. People that have an endless store of patience and positivity, and they're going to keep your volunteers engaged and exciting. So yeah, you don't want your regular staff to kind of scatter um, because there are volunteers on the scene. Of course, we do want to still have the professionals um, present as well. So we've talked a little bit about recruiting them and a little bit about managing. I do want to say a few words about thanking them, which is a very important piece. And, there's different camps about, to what extent is appropriate or is required as far as thanking your volunteers. Some folks believe, oh, well, it's just the reward of the service itself. That that is what inspired them to come out, and they're good with leaving with just that. And I do think that of course there's some credence to that argument, but I am always a proponent for giving them something. Um, and a few notes about thanking them. If you do have perks, try not to promise them way up front. And definitely don't deliver them up front. There's many a volunteer project that folks have heard about this great T-shirt, and they get that great T-shirt and they are out the door, and you still got tasks that you wanted to apply volunteers to, and you know they are no longer available to you. So if you do have perks, try not to promise them way up front. You don't want to lead with, oh, if you volunteer with us, you'll get this great shirt. You do want to lead with how rewarding an experience it is, and then, into that conversation. And, maybe there's this sweet T-shirt, too. And, again, yes, try to have perks. I know budget is a concern, um, but dollar store trinkets and candy and a personal note have served me well. And there are whole Pinterest pages devoted to cute little ways to kind of package your uh, thank you tokens. So that's that could be a lot of fun too. Uh, Even non-tangible perks like discount codes to an organization or business that you partner with, those are always well received in my experience. Um, and then maybe think about some type of recognition ceremony, um, and for that you might draw on uh, your budget or your cash reserves to kind of really show the volunteers the impact that they've had and recognize the work that they've done for you. But a more budget-friendly way would be to do a potluck. I think that it is the intention that shines above all. Uh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't note that we should do our best to make opportunities accessible. So here at Glass, we champion accessibility in literature and in library services. We really try to make those accessible for all, but we really champion accessibility in all aspects. So here's a great resource you can check out, if you will, and it is on the Corporation for National and Community Services website, and that's the program that administers, if you've ever heard of or even used Vistas, AmeriCorps Vistas, in your agencies. And they say service and volunteer programs need to be proactive to ensure that everyone, including individuals with disabilities, have the opportunity to serve and to be active participants. And I really couldn't agree with that more. Those who may have disabilities are every bit as capable, and they too, are wanting to participate in rewarding experiences that volunteer service provides. So you do want to kind of have an eye toward making your volunteer projects accessible. And again, that link there kind of gives some good resources to help you to that end. They had topics like reasonable accommodations, designing your own disability engagement plan. So they have online coursework that you could kind of complete to get more well-versed in those areas. We're going to take a look at, well, we're not going to pop out to each of these links, but I'm just going to go down the list of these resources and tools that I've found helpful in carrying out my duties, volunteer management duties. The first link is a great volunteer recruitment checklist, and it's just kind of a good touchstone to kind of figure out where your organization is as far as their efforts so far with regards to volunteer management, and kind of the gaps, and that you can kind of see what gaps you have and where you might need to kind of bolster your volunteer management piece. Volgistics. It is a free volunteer management software. There are others out there, and you can always go to one of those sites that kind of does a side-by-side comparison of, what each of the softwares offer in comparison to one another. Volgistics is the software that I am familiar with, and it has all of the important bells and whistles that I think are integral. It's web-based. It allows for attendance tracking. It provided some stock forms or memos that you could just customize to fit, your organization in your own language. And it also allows you to run reports. So Volgistics, I found, was robust enough to do anything that we needed to do. Alive is kind of a professional volunteerism association, and the perks of belonging to such an organization, and I believe membership ran from like $50 annually to $150. But of course, networking opportunity, access to experts, and you really can't place a value on that, in my opinion. Just real access to experts, real conversations with experts has always provided me with an insight kind of far above what you might get from just reading something. So yeah, I think that that bears worth the price of admission. Inside track on events where you can recruit, so kind of like those volunteer fairs that I talked about earlier. And it also allows organizations to post needed volunteer positions. No, I'm sorry. You can't do that with Volgistics. You do that with Volunteer Match. So yeah, for Volunteer Match, you can post volunteer positions, and it allows volunteers to kind of use it as a search engine to search for events in their area. So very similar to Hands-On Atlanta's functionality on their website. Points of Light is an organization, and their mission is to help millions of volunteers change the world, and they mobilize people to take action on the causes they care about through innovative programs, events, and campaigns. Theirs is an amazing organization. If I'm not mistaken, it was founded by the Bushes, I believe Laura Bush, but don't quote me on that. uh, but I know she's, closely affiliated with librarianship. You know what? No, I think it was the Clintons. I'm going off on a tangent, and obviously I don't know who were the founders. But suffice it to say, it is an excellent organization. I had the great fortune to attend their conference in 2014, and it was phenomenal. So just excellent sessions. Like there wasn't a dud among them. They were all, just dynamic, informative sessions, and too many celebrities to count. Mira Sorvino spoke on human trafficking. Lamont Rucker, Chelsea Clinton, Tyler Perry. So yeah, checking out the Points of Light website is worth your time. And if you were interested in sending someone from your agency to the conference, which it is coming up, I think it's like next week, like June 18th or something. So I don't know if you would make it uh, make their deadline, but they have scholarship opportunities if you wanted to send folks from your organization there. Points of Light. Oh, we talked briefly about background checks. So Verify Volunteers is a background check service that is geared specifically toward volunteers. Um, there's another A to Z list of resources, so a whole bunch of content related to volunteer management, but just in that A to Z format. And Corporation for National and Community Service, which arguably is like the foremost authority on volunteerism in America. So they've got a ton of great resources on there, including the link that I just shared with you about making volunteerism more accessible. And lastly, in your planning, Excel or Google Sheets really are indispensable. Like if you don't even have all of these other, management tools, but you do have Excel and Google Sheets, that's like my go-to when I'm starting to manage a volunteer project is just to open up and create uh, sheets with tabs like my volunteers and tasks, and start defining and hashing those out, and group those into pre-planning or day of tasks. I make a list of organizations to solicit. I make a list of organizations that we've established contact with, and they have a history of partnering with us. Important deadlines, and then that's just to kind of have it all living in one place. And I find the Excel and Google Sheets is sufficient for that task. So hopefully those are some resources and tools that you might also find helpful. And I know that I've said a mouthful, and it really is just the tip of the iceberg. Once you've kind of immersed yourself into managing your volunteers for whatever it is, your long-term project or your one-shot deal, it it is very very dynamic, and you kind of have to roll with the punches and build the plane as you're flying sometimes. But it's exciting work, and I hope I've conveyed that. And I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Asha, Heather stated that there is also local and state councils of volunteer managers, and in Atlanta we have the COVA, COVA, and
Mhm.
the Atlanta Volunteer Managers Roundtable.
Perfect. Yes. COVA. I did have some interaction with COVA in in my work with volunteer management. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Those are definitely worth adding to the resource list. I wasn't familiar with the roundtable that you mentioned.
Asha, will you be able to share the PowerPoint page with the links to our participants?
Definitely. Yep. I'd be happy to.
And Stephen made a comment. He said that points of light, he remembered it being mentioned in the speech by George Bush. But he's not sure who established the organization, but he recalls it as well.
Was it Stephen?
Yes.
Thank you, Stephen, because I needed that cosign. Yes, it was. I think it did. It is an offshoot from that famous speech where he referenced 1,000 points of light, and I think that it built from there. So yeah, thanks, Stephen.
Are there any other questions? Well, I don't see any more questions. So, Asha, thank you for being with us today, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. If you do have any other questions, please do not hesitate to contact either of us. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on this presentation, and we would appreciate it if you complete it and leave us your feedback. Let us know how we're doing. And again, the CE certificates will be emailed to the email addresses that were used to register for this event. And if you're viewing this as a group, you can share it. You can share their certificate. So I want to thank you all, and be sure to attend next month's Power Hour series. Bye-bye.
Bye, all.